By their fruits, you will know them. With all the confusion and division running amok in the world, it's natural to want to look up to a savior figure. In times past, many of these figures rose to prominence during times of crisis. In desperation and fear, we clung to our loved ones and looked up to the podiums with expressions of hope, proclaiming, "This person could save this nation." Very seldomly have we examined the mechanisms that run the system that keep its wheels spinning on endlessly. From the times of Rome and perhaps further back, we have looked up, and in more recent years, left or right to pin the blame. Today we have a lot of key players in the game, some less known but just as important, and some very well known but even more controversial. And with the rise in power of these figures, there's definitely been a swift shift towards action in order to carry out a particular set of plans. But how do these figures get us on their bandwagon to begin with? What are their true plans? What are the psychological tools they use to not just make us accept, but defend the very systems controlling us? And more importantly, what happens if we don't play along? Because what we're seeing now, it's already happened before, and it's playing out again right under our noses. But this isn't just a silly little power grab, it's a calculated plan for the foundation of something much bigger. A world built on the foundation of AI governance, digitized centralized currency, and a surveillance state so subtle, you might not even notice it's there. All throughout history, empires have sought out new methods in order to retain control over the masses. Most famously, Rome itself resorted to bread and circuses in order to keep the public complacent and comfortable, as expressed by Roman author Juvenal during the time. Instead of giving the people real political power or even addressing their actual needs, the Roman elites would give free rein in gladiator games. Distractions designed to entertain and keep people oblivious to what was really going on behind the curtain. But Rome wasn't the only one. In 1933, the Reichstag, which was Germany's parliament building, caught fire under mysterious circumstances. The Nazis took full advantage of this event and blamed it on a communist plot to overthrow the government. After this, they declared a state of emergency and issued the Reichstag Fire Decree, which abolished freedom of speech, assembly, and the press, suspended the right to privacy, including phone tapping and mail interception, allowed for arrests without due process, authorized government surveillance and searches without warrants, and gave the government the power to bypass local governments and further centralize authority. Some believe the Nazis were the ones who started the fire in the first place, while others believe it was a lone arson. Whatever it was, this event was used as leverage in a quest to gain more control over the German people. And in more recent years, we have, of course, what happened during 9/11, which was a horrible event that resulted in a lot of grief in the hearts of the American people. Only 45 days after the event, Congress passed the Patriot Act. This was rushed through with barely any debate. People were still traumatized and scared, so they were way more willing to give the government more authority and power, all in the name of safety. Bush signed it into law on October 26, 2001, and what resulted was the permission of the government to spy on everyone's phone and internet activity, not just suspects, secretly search your home without telling you right away, wiretap any of your devices without new warrants, access your bank and financial info if you seem suspicious, and detain immigrants indefinitely without charges if labeled a threat.
Barbara, what's in this new anti-terrorism bill that would presumably help investigators get to the bottom of all this?
Right. There's a lot in this bill. Attorney General John Ashcroft absolutely loves it. He said, the hour this thing is signed, I'm going to instruct law enforcement how to use these new powers. Some of them are being able to trace email messages from place to place, making it easier to surveil people for terrorist purposes, for intelligence purposes.
Do you sense a theme here? There are two methods used here. The first, complacency. This is our starting point, the calm before the storm. Much like the bread and circuses of ancient Rome, complacency in this context is distraction. It's a sense of passive contentment. People are numbed by addictive entertainment, such as the hyper-engaging algorithms of today or the binge-worthy TV programs that existed long before social media's reign. In this state, there is a reliance on the system for comfort and stability, like the convenience of fast food, easy transportation, and instant communication. This reliance on the status quo keeps the people focused on comfort and modern distractions, making them much less likely to question the system. As a result of this, there's an indifference, or lack of awareness even, of the puppet masters behind the scenes shaping their lives. And the second method used is crisis. This is when an event, which could be real or manufactured, is exaggerated in order to create fear and panic. This fear is then used as leverage in order to influence people into accepting solutions they may not have wanted without this added pressure. These solutions may be used to increase control, limit freedoms, or push certain agendas. It's important to note that these events may be actual issues that need addressing. However, it's not the events that are necessarily the problem themselves, but in how the powers that be use these events in order to manipulate the general public. These two tools, complacency and crisis, are the two most effective methods for maintaining control over a population. Though, obviously, this was achieved differently before the introduction of the internet and televised media. Now we're seeing a much more sophisticated methodology when it comes to employing these tools. As further detailed in Noam Chomsky's Manufacturing Consent, Professor Chomsky lays out the groundwork for how we see this playing out in modern times.
You write in Manufacturing Consent that it's the primary function of the mass media in the United States to mobilize public support for the special interests that dominate the government and the private sector. What are those interests?
Well, if you want to understand the way any society works, ours or any other, the first place to look is who is in a position to make the decisions that determine the way the society functions. Societies differ, but in ours, the major decisions over what happens in the society, decisions over investment and production and distribution and so on, are in the hands of a relatively concentrated network of major corporations and conglomerates and investment firms and so on. They are also the ones who staff the major executive positions in the government, and they're the ones who own the media, and they're the ones who have to be in a position to make the decisions. They have an overwhelmingly dominant role in the way life happens, what's done in the society. Within the economic system, by law and in principle, they dominate. The control over resources and the need to satisfy their interests imposes very sharp constraints on the political system and the ideological system.
The question for us is, so what do we do? In NATO, where I was Supreme Allied Commander, you flood the zone in Eastern Europe. You bring in troops, tanks, missile systems, warships, all the above, in order to send a signal to Vladimir Putin at a minimum. I think that would be an important signal to be sending Vladimir Putin at this moment, Ari.
So Professor Chomsky is essentially saying that these large media companies have interests of their own, and these interests are to feed a certain narrative that tends to align with those of the elite. To use an example, in his book, Chomsky points out that General Electric, which at the time owned major media outlets like NBC, had a vested interest in promoting policies and narratives that benefited its shareholders. General Electric was deeply involved in industries such as defense, banking, and manufacturing. Media outlets owned by General Electric were likely to promote favorable narratives about these sectors, which included glorifying military actions, downplaying corporate misconduct, or advocating for policies that benefited large corporations. So these large media companies have a vested interest in manipulating the population into conforming to particular agendas through a curated narrative. What's the fastest way to get people on board with what they want? That would be fear. In Naomi Klein's book, The Shock Doctrine, The Rise of Disaster Capitalism, she describes a method employed by the elite she calls the disaster capitalism complex. Disaster capitalism, according to Klein, is a phenomenon where those in power exploit the chaos brought on by the aftermath of natural disasters, wars, and other crises in order to push through unpopular policies.
I got really interested in the idea of shock and its use as a political tool when I was in Iraq covering the occupation. because there was this almost triple storm of shock going on in that country. There was the first shock, which was the shock and awe invasion, which was followed immediately after by economic shock therapy, more radical than had been attempted even in the former Soviet Union, just a complete overhaul of the economy overnight. That's at least what was attempted.
U.S. Secretary of Commerce John Bison told the chamber Iraq is worth the risk.
More U.S. companies see Iraq as a promising and important emerging market, one that's set to grow faster, even now, faster in these years immediately ahead than China.
After Mr. Maliki's comments, Deputy Secretary Nides told VOA American businesses should jump at the chance to serve tens of millions of Iraqi consumers.
At the end of the day, it's about making money, it's about opportunities, and there's plenty of opportunities we had in Iraq.
And then there was this third shock, which came into play after people started resisting the occupation and those other two shocks, and that was the shock of torture.
17 years ago, these pictures of smiling American guards abusing Iraqi prisoners shook the world, uncovering the dark side of the US's war on terror. The gut-wrenching pictures of abuse, humiliation, and torture of detainees at Abu Ghraib prison sent Washington into damage control. Few things undermined the US's claim that they were helping bring democracy to Iraq more than the scandal at Abu Ghraib. According to a Red Cross report from 2004, approximately 70 to 90% of the prisoners were mistakenly detained. Most of them were picked up in random military sweeps and checkpoints, and many of them were women and teenagers.
And I became interested in why it was that the architects of the invasion and occupation of Iraq had chosen this as their metaphor. And what was it about the idea of shock that was so appealing to the people who wanted to remake Iraq? And I started to actually try to go back to the source of the metaphor of shock therapy. So I started reading about its use in psychiatric contexts and also its use in torture. And that led me to a really close reading of the declassified CIA interrogation manuals that were first published in 1963 and in the 80s, reprinted and have since been declassified. And looking at how the CIA talks about the importance of putting prisoners into a state of shock, because when they're in a state of shock, they're not able to protect their interests. They become childlike and regressed. The interrogation manuals are really obsessed with this idea of regression. So I started to think about how that had been applied on a mass scale.
In these states of vulnerability, those in power push through reforms that favor corporate interests, often at the expense of those affected who are too overwhelmed or disoriented to push back. She describes it as a modern offshoot of the military-industrial complex, but one that's not limited to warfare. Instead, it thrives in the aftermath, during the rebuilding and recovery phase. An example she uses in her book mentions the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. Before the storm, New Orleans was once home to the state's largest local union, the United Teachers of New Orleans. However, after Hurricane Katrina swept through, that all changed. When schools were closed, all 7,500 teachers were fired, which completely destabilized the union. After that, the school system eventually shifted entirely to charter schools, which are state-funded but privately operated. This means that in order for teachers to form a union, it must be within each individual charter school, rather than negotiating collectively across the entire city. As a result, only about half a dozen schools currently have teachers' unions. Apart from Hurricane Katrina, we also have an example of disaster capitalism on a much larger scale compared to the strategy employed in smaller regions. Prime example one could use is billionaire Bill Gates. Gates has been pushing the idea as of late that a carbon tax in first world countries should be employed in response to climate change.
Well, the rich countries have to play a central role, both funding R&D and having policies. In some cases, carbon taxes will be used.
This is coming from a man who, not too long ago, held $1.4 billion of investments in the world's biggest fossil fuel companies. Yet he thinks a tax on carbon emissions would be an appropriate response. So the person who is very much responsible for a large part of the problem now wants to drop a solution, not by actually helping to eliminate the problem, but by putting a band-aid over it. It would be naive to assume this carbon tax would benefit the people in any way, or that the wealthy would be taxed appropriately. As of 2021, Gates appears to have divested his holdings in oil and gas. However, as of recently, IRS records clearly shows that the entity that manages the Gates Foundation's $75.5 billion endowment, the Gates Foundation Trust, hasn't really done much in terms of backing off from fossil fuels. In fact, its stake in fossil fuels seems to have increased. It suggests Mr. Gates is attempting to save face in a time of increasing hostility towards billionaires with power that only exists from the faith we put in them. Like I said earlier, the use of crisis in order to provide more security or a solution is a very clever means to gain more control. When the masses are in fear and desperately looking for someone to save them, they can swoop in, promising to provide the antidote to our problems. And in doing so, time and time again, all throughout history, what has that shown us? It reinforces the attitude that we don't have power ourselves, that there are outside forces so dangerous that only the powerful elite can save us from them, that by forfeiting our sovereignty, we will be promised security. We become complacent and far too obedient. So we understand the methods they use to get people to go along with their agendas. But what do these wealthy elites got cooking up right now? How can we spot the complacency and crisis methodology in our current times?
At the end of another turbulent and volatile day in the financial markets, the sole cause of that volatility, Donald J. Trump. The Dow today falling more than 300 points. It began the day down about 1,200 points, only to rise briefly this morning and then drop again. CNBC is reporting this, quote, "This is the Trump recession."
Just a few months ago, Trump announced sweeping tariffs that would impact all U.S. imports. This move, dubbed Liberation Day, correlated with a rapid downturn in the stock market. In response to the market volatility, Trump backed down from the trade tensions and put a 90-day pause on most tariffs. But it makes one wonder. Trump says regarding the stock market sell-off that though he didn't intentionally engineer it,
but sometimes you have to take medicine to fix something.
Once these tariffs take hold and the stock market shows potentially more volatility, could this be leveraged as well? And what would they want to leverage? Investigative journalist Whitney Webb thinks it's a possibility.
And the other thing that I'm really concerned about as it relates to, a coming economic crisis is that I think we're going to see a major effort to saddle American consumers with programmable, surveillable money and seizable money. And so, of course, a lot of people for years now have been very concerned about central bank digital currencies or CBDCs, but there are also things issued by the private sector, like stablecoins, for example, that are just as programmable and surveillable and seizable as CBDCs are. So I think it's very likely in the event of a major debt crisis or some sort of crisis that damages significantly regular Americans' purchasing power, there will be an effort to onboard Americans onto one of those two versions of programmable, surveillable money. So it's possible, if Kamala wins, we could see a CBDC or something like that. But in the case of Trump, he's sort of come out in favor of stablecoins. He did that recently at his speech at the Bitcoin conference earlier this year. And, stablecoins are just as programmable and surveillable and seizable as CBDCs in theory are. And I think those, as people have rightly pointed out, are a threat to our financial privacy and ultimately our financial freedom. So I think people should be focusing not just on CBDCs, but also, these other digital currencies that have the potential to offer those same, Orwellian functionalities to the people issuing them and producing them.
In another interview, though previously not endorsing cryptocurrencies, CEO of BlackRock, Larry Fink, the world's largest asset management firm, seems to change his tune. BlackRock, if some of you don't know, oversees trillions of dollars in investments across multiple industries. They have major stakes in some of the biggest companies out there, like Apple, Microsoft, ExxonMobil, and Amazon. Basically, BlackRock is the one pulling the strings in global finance. Though previously not interested in cryptocurrencies, Fink seems to now be praising the idea of a digital currency, or more particularly a stablecoin.
And this was for you a big switch as well, because you were a naysayer for a very, very long time.
Yeah, I probably switched. For the first 3 years of thinking about it, I was a naysayer, and about 2 years ago I switched, and I'm actually, as I said in the last 2 years, I'm a big believer.
There is a great need for digitization of currency. There is no need for hard currency anymore. So I'm a very large believer of a stable coin type of currency, not a Bitcoin, a stable coin that is based on a currency, or each country or a country creates a digitization of that.
You could have a basket of currencies, right?
Or you could create, that would be a fantastic deal, a basket of a world currency. That could work out too.
A stablecoin is not the same as crypto is not tied to fiat currency and is much more decentralized. A stablecoin would likely be tied to fiat and digitized, making it much easier to surveil people and exercise far more authority over the people while keeping them tied to the crushing weight of the ever-increasing wealth gap. But it seems Trump has already issued a stablecoin.
I think it's the future of our financial systems, and I want to make sure that's domiciled in America, done by Americans.
There was Donald Trump Jr. crowing about Trump family plans to sell a new crypto coin called a stablecoin for its steady value linked to another currency, like the U.S. dollar. It will be offered by World Liberty Financial, a company which was started by the Trumps last September.
Bitcoin, it just seems like a scam.
But Trump's position is a big flip-flop. For a long time, he dismissed this electronic way to invest, collect, and exchange virtual money as too risky, echoing concerns about criminal organizations using it to secretly move and launder money all around the world. He posted, "Unregulated crypto assets can facilitate unlawful behavior, including drug trade and other illegal activity." But now he's all in, with meme coins issued in his name and that of First Lady Melania Trump.
So, what would a centralized digital currency mean for the people? If a market crisis resulted in a Trump-backed stablecoin as a solution, we could see several things. 1. It may seem like a savior at first, considering market volatility is pretty scary. It might seem like a safe option considering honestly we're all just trying to get by. But we would quickly find out that it would result in far more consolidation of power through digital currency. It would be like if Jeff Bezos became president and announced, "Alright, let's all use Amazon bucks now." 2. The repercussions of digitizing a centralized currency would be huge. You think we have far too much surveillance right now? This would be like 10 times stronger. Like CBDCs, or central bank digital currencies, stablecoins can be programmable. This means rules can be baked into the coin. Where you spend it, how much you can spend, maybe even what you can buy. It's like having a dollar with terms and conditions. If things go sideways politically, or you're on some kind of watch list, you could be shut off from your own funds. We've already seen this kind of thing with payment processors and protesters. Now imagine that, but built into the money itself. And 3. In a crisis, people want security, so they might flock to something like a centralized digital currency if it promises stability. But that would shift a ton of economic power into the hands of a private issuer. Not good. The fault is in the centralization, not necessarily the digitalization. So it's important to keep an eye on this in the future and definitely don't fall for the trap of security that might be promised if something potentially goes sideways in the market. But what other patterns are we seeing in regards to the elite's use of complacency and crisis?
We're going to build the wall. We have no choice. We have no choice. Build that wall, build that wall, build that wall, build that wall. Build that wall. Build that wall. Build that wall. Build that wall.
We've seen some pretty insane things happen at record-breaking speeds since Trump took office. One of those deals with immigration. Since returning to office, Trump has unleashed a very harsh immigration agenda, detaining migrants en masse, expanding Guantanamo use, pushing to end birthright citizenship, and deporting people even against court orders.
Honestly, this is authoritarian, however you spin it. And during Trump's first term, we really saw the beginnings of how this narrative built around fear would be used to push people to go along with this.
These are animals. They're coming into our country. They're not people. These are animals. They're animals. What was the name? Animals.
It's in their genes, and we got a lot of bad genes in our country right now. They left. They had 425,000 people come into our country that shouldn't be here, that are criminals.
I know a lot of people are tired of hearing about Trump and are fatigued from the constant barrage of news of what he's doing. But it's imperative to listen and really understand what this means. This isn't about the binary system pushed by the elite of left or right, a tactic used to divide us so we fail to see behind the curtain. In reality, they all play on the same team. They're all in bed with each other. This is about resisting an attempt for far greater authoritarianism than we've ever seen before. When it comes to the immigration crisis, the fear tactic used deals with Americans' livelihoods. Those in power manipulate the fear of those trying to make ends meet, exploiting anxieties about job security and the potential loss of employment to outsiders.
Americans are being squeezed out of the labor force and their jobs are taken. By the way, you know who's taking the jobs that are created? 107% of those jobs are taken by illegal aliens.
They also capitalize on the fear of crime, playing on people's desire to keep their family safe. By stoking the flames of these fears, they are able to successfully gain support for their agenda.
But with more security, are we really seeing the safety we were promised?
Hell, I don't know anything for certain because you won't tell me where you're getting your information. When the towers came down, you were in a hotel in Mexico. I was here. I was working. Didn't even know about the attacks until that evening. You see, Mr. Reese, until that day, I had spent the better part of my life making myself very rich. Suddenly, all that money didn't seem to amount to much. After the attacks, the government gave itself the power to read every email, listen to every cell phone. But they needed something that could sort through it all. Something that could pick the terrorists out of the general population before they could act. The public wanted to be protected. They just didn't want to know how they were being protected. So when they finally got a system that worked, they kept it secret. So how do you know about it? I built it.
More recently, the AI tech giant Palunteer stepped in to help with these plans. Palunteer is a tech company that builds software for analyzing huge datasets, mainly used by US government agencies like the CIA, FBI, and ICE for surveillance, intelligence, and predictive policing. To put it simply, it helps institutions connect the dots between seemingly unrelated data points, like a digital crystal ball for Big Brother. Interestingly, Peter Thiel, who co-founded Palunteer, came up with a name from The Lord of the Rings. In the book, Palunteeri were magical seeing stones used to communicate and spy across great distances. In the movie, it was depicted as a sort of crystal ball with an iris, a sort of all-seeing eye. Very strange if you consider the recent news regarding the company Palunteer and its team-up with ICE to create an immigration OSI to speed up deportations. Apparently, ICE and Palunteer made a $29.9 million deal for a new prototype for a new platform that allows ICE agents to track and monitor people by analyzing data from things like criminal records, travel history, and social media. The system could expand surveillance, targeting immigrant communities, and potentially normalizing widespread monitoring of the public. And to add further, in March of 2025, Trump signed Executive Order 14243, which directs federal agencies to break down data barriers and to start sharing things like tax records, unemployment information, bank account numbers, medical and health data, social security data, you name it. This was all originally framed as a way to fight fraud and eliminate wasteful spending. Now, there's been a lot of talk about Doge, but not a lot about the real player behind it, Palunteer. Palunteer has massively expanded its government contracts, pulling in over $113 million through new and existing deals with agencies like Homeland Security and the Pentagon. And that figure doesn't even include a recent $795 million Department of Defense contract that hasn't been spent yet. It's clear now that with all this data being funneled to one location, and with none other than Palunteer behind it, the same company involved with the war in Gaza, this could turn sour. Very sour.
That a few people get wealthy, and if you said platitudes that were obviously stupid, you could...
Getting wealthy off of killing Palestinians. Palunteer kills Palestinians with their AI and technology.
Oh.
They're killing my family in Palestine.
Yeah. And, you know... Well, if you... Do you want to hear my answer? Sure, go ahead. Okay. So, I think the primary cause of death to Palestinians... Okay, do you want to hear the answer, or do you want to yell? Well, you don't want to hear an answer? Obviously. So the primary source of death in Palestine is the fact that Hamas has realized that there are millions and millions of useful idiots that will...
Can we get security up there?
Okay. Your AI and your technology from Palunteer kills Palestinians!
Migrant crisis.
This crisis.
The crisis. 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 The crisis. This crisis.
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 National security crisis.
You are being watched. The government has a secret system, a machine that spies on you every hour of every day. We work in secret. You'll never find us. But victim or perpetrator, if your number's up, we'll find you.
Could this expand further? We're starting to see signs of mistrust in identification, a pain point that to some needs a solution immediately, but could be weaponized in the future against its own people.
Not only is AI a weapon that can be wielded by those in power for stronger surveillance, but stronger identity verification could as well. But both political parties go about it in different ways.
Hi, I'm Christy Noam, the United States Secretary of Homeland Security. If you plan on traveling, we need your help to prevent delays and to prove your identity. Get a real ID. These IDs keep our country safe because they help prevent fraud and they enhance security. Please do your part to protect our country.
Putting aside physical IDs, there is an interesting push for digitizing identity as well.
And I think the cornerstone of those is the effort to create an all-encompassing digital ID that will determine what you can and can't access in your life. You know, the idea of having a lot of the surveillance sucked up on you being linked to the digital ID, having it determine, having your medical records in there, having your telecom in there, your social media account, really all of your aspect of life in this centralized digital ID is very problematic. And then there's the whole idea of linking this intimately with a digital wallet that, again, would have some sort of programmable, surveillable, and seizable currency where, you know, which, again, as I said earlier, has major implications for financial freedom and financial privacy. I think we need to focus a lot on those in particular because a lot of consciousness was generated about those policy agendas during the COVID era and the risks of them. And, you know, unfortunately, we're in a situation now globally where you have people both on the left and the right marketing these policy agendas under very different metrics that they think they're their base will be most receptive to. So in the case of, Donald Trump, for example, he's calling for a biometric entry-exit system as a way to tackle illegal immigration. A campaign lawyer of his went on a podcast a few months ago saying that biometric facial recognition would be a way to stomp out the voter ID or the voter fraud issue and, institute voter ID. And you can support voter ID, but why can't we just have physical driver's license or the type of, IDs people have always had? Why does it have to be a biometric facial recognition thing? And unfortunately, Trump's vice presidential candidate, J.D. Vance, is very intimately connected to a man named Peter Thiel, who funds a lot of companies that are, for example, building the virtual border wall or building facial recognition systems that are being sent to law enforcement. It's very likely that these type of policies would also be implemented, if Kamala wins, for example, too, but going to be sold under different metrics as well to her base. But a lot of the same backers behind her, like Reid Hoffman, for example, envision the same type of policy coming to fruition.
So taking a look at reimagining digital IDs by the World Economic Forum, we can see what they're pushing for.
They claim decentralized digital IDs are the future. They say properly implemented decentralized ID could enhance privacy, control, efficiency, and effectiveness. Notice their use of the word decentralized. This is a clever manipulation tactic, because while they tout the benefits of a decentralized digital ID, that is far from the reality. They also don't mention the marriage between digital IDs and digital currency in this document, but in other articles, we can see how this all comes together. In How Universal Wallets Can Help Businesses Unleash the Full Potential of Digital Identity, they speak on how this marriage between the two could look through digital universal wallets. Universal wallets, characterized by one interface that makes the fragmented user ID/password system obsolete, are paving the way for a disruptive, user-centered experience of managing digital assets. We no longer need to carry our physical wallets with us wherever we go. Digital payment mechanisms from Apple Pay and Google Pay to Zelle and Venmo have been widely available for some time. Some US states are even adopting MDL, a mobile driver's license, and digital identification. Health insurance cards, airplane boarding passes, city transportation cards, and COVID-19 vaccination records can all also be stored in a smartphone mobile wallet. Wallets are expected to transform and support new paradigms of value exchange via the trinity of identity, money, and objects. Identity. Tokenization could breathe life into digital IDs, enabling people to interact and transact across digital spaces with authenticity and security. Tokenized currency could revolutionize economic transactions, making them instantaneous and borderless, a vital feature for the fluidity of the digital marketplace. Tokenization could extend to assets, enabling the ownership and trade of virtual goods, from artwork to real estate, enhancing the economy.
I believe the next generation for markets, the next generation for securities will be tokenization of securities.
We believe the next step going forward will be the tokenization of financial assets. And that means every stock, every bond will have its own, basically, CUSIP. It'll be on one general ledger. Every investor, you and I, will have our own number, our own identification. We could rid ourselves of all issues around illicit activities about bonds and stocks and digital by having a tokenization.
Yeah. Imagine trying to buy a house, but only being able to afford a percentage of the house, not the entire thing. So a corporation could own 70% and you could own 30%. Sounds great.
So in essence, while they are calling it decentralized digital ID, what it would really look like is a digital universal wallet stored on your phone in an app likely provided by one of the few privatized tech giants, where you can store everything all in one place. All your CBDCs or stablecoins in there, your driver's license, your passports, your insurance cards, everything you need. Wouldn't that be great and totally secure and totally not be used against us in the future?
So yes, it's obvious that if both IDs and currency were digitized, we would be on the fast track to a Big Brother Orwellian future. But how could they possibly get people on board to accept a digital ID? Well, they actually answer this in the document.
A lack of political will may also be an obstacle to achieving decentralized ID. Without a mandate to foster innovation, stakeholders may not be sufficiently incentivized to take the steps necessary to achieve enhanced user privacy and security. Although many institutions and individuals continue to push for enhanced privacy, many may not recognize the relationship between digital ID and personal data and how developing decentralized ID systems could help improve individual privacy. Right, privacy. So perhaps we'll see a major cybersecurity crisis in the future with the technocratic oligarchs using it as leverage to save us with digital IDs and centralized stablecoins, promising us security and privacy. We'll have to see. It's hard to believe in privacy when you have your own government spying on you.
A March executive order pushes all federal agencies to share their data, effectively giving Palunteer the keys to the kingdom. At least 4 major agencies are already on board: the IRS, Homeland Security, Health and Human Services, and the Social Security Administration. Each channeling sensitive data like medical claims, bank accounts, even immigration records into one central database.
Whatever happens, though I realize this information all sounds very bleak, I want to remind you that you have the power. And that power lies in the word no. You don't have to comply. You have the agency to say no. Imagine if all of us just started saying no. There are far more of us than them. We have the numbers. We do have the power, regardless of the fake supremacy these oligarchs have been riding on for this long. The no for one person may look different for another person. Perhaps it could mean relying less on the system, growing a garden, diversifying your skill set, deleting Instagram or TikTok. Small steps that make you less reliant on the system, rigged by the elites, and even more powerful in your own abilities. Lean on your community. Lean on your close ones. They will help you in tough times. Not these moochers who rely on the labor of the middle and lower classes to even exist. Remember, it all starts with no.